I am Carlos Alberto, the thinker. Welcome to the journey. We live in extraordinary times. Every day, headlines present us with a new crisis, a new conflict, a new alliance, or a new dispute among the great powers. Everything seems to be moving at a speed humanity has rarely experienced before. To many, these events appear as isolated incidents. A war in one region, a trade negotiation in another, an energy crisis, a technological breakthrough, a presidential election, a new international organization. However, when we view all these events together, an inevitable question begins to emerge. Are we truly facing independent events, or are we witnessing a single historical process manifesting in different ways? That is the question we will attempt to answer today. Not through speculation, not through ideological confrontation, nor through a desire to confirm our own beliefs. We will do so using the method proposed by Stoic Geopolitics, a method that does not seek to tell us what to think, but rather to teach us how to observe an extraordinary complex reality with greater serenity and objectivity. For there is a vast difference between looking and observing. We all look, very few of us observe. Looking consists of registering events. Observing consists of discovering the relationships that exist between them, and often those relationships remain hidden behind the daily noise of information. We live in an era where there has never been so much data available, yet, paradoxically, it has never been so difficult to understand what is truly happening. Every minute we receive news from every corner of the planet. Military conflicts, economic agreements, new technologies, financial movements, political statements, social changes. Everything seems to demand our attention at once. The result is a constant sense of uncertainty. We have more information than ever, but we do not necessarily understand more. Perhaps because the problem of our time is not a lack of information. Maybe the real problem is the absence of a method to interpret it, and that is precisely where the proposal of Stoic Geopolitics comes in. Stoic Geopolitics does not aim to replace geopolitics. Its subject of study remains the same. Power relations, states, the economy, technology, culture, alliances, conflicts, institutions, strategic resources, everything that influences the functioning of the international system. What changes is not what we observe. What changes is the way we observe it. Stoic Geopolitics incorporates the principles of Stoicism as an intellectual discipline to reduce observer bias, separate facts from interpretations, and understand with greater objectivity the processes that shape international reality. It seems like a small difference. In reality, it completely changes the quality of the analysis. Because when the observer allows themselves to be dominated by political preferences, ideological sympathies, or emotions, they stop analyzing reality and begin defending a position. And from that moment on, objectivity begins to vanish. Stoicism proposes exactly the opposite. It invites us to accept reality as it is before passing judgment on it. It reminds us that our opinions do not alter the facts. The facts remain, interpretations change. That is why the analyst's primary obligation is to respect reality, even when that reality contradicts our expectations. It is not a simple exercise. We all have preferences. We all have values. We all have convictions. But precisely for that reason, we need a method that compels us to distinguish between what we know and what we merely believe. Only then do we truly begin to understand, and when we observe history with that attitude, a recurring phenomenon emerges. International systems change. They do not remain static. Throughout the centuries, empires, alliances, organizations, and international orders have arisen, offering stability for a time, but none were permanent. All underwent processes of transformation. After the Second World War, a new international architecture was born. The institutions established at that time reflected the specific distribution of power that existed in 1945. Decades later, the end of the Cold War once again profoundly altered that reality. Economic capabilities changed, technology changed, strategic priorities changed, the structure of international trade changed, and today we are once again witnessing transformations of enormous magnitude. Artificial intelligence, technological competition, the reorganization of supply chains, energy security, access to strategic minerals, the growing importance of new regional powers. Everything suggests that reality keeps shifting. And when reality changes in a sustained way, sooner or later, relations between states begin to change as well. And it is precisely at this point that we should pause for a moment, because when we observe a reality changing so rapidly, it is tempting to seek immediate answers. Who will win? Who will lose? Which will be the next dominant power? These are understandable questions, but perhaps they are not the most important ones. Stoic Geopolitics proposes reversing the order of reasoning. Before attempting to answer, seek to understand. Before drawing conclusions, observe the processes, because events grab the headlines. Processes, on the other hand, write history. A conflict may last months. A historical process may unfold over decades. A presidential election can change a government, but it can hardly, on its own, alter the major historical trends that have been taking shape for a long time. History has its own rhythm, a rhythm that does not always align with the political calendar or the news cycle. Understanding that rhythm is one of the greatest advantages of geopolitical analysis, and also one of the greatest challenges, because it demands patience, it demands prudence, and above all, it demands accepting that results can often only be understood when viewed within a much broader context. Perhaps that is why Stoic Geopolitics insists on distinguishing between the event and the process. The event captures our attention. The process explains its significance. When we learn to observe processes, we stop reacting solely to the day's news. We begin to recognize trends, gradual changes, new power dynamics, and possibilities that remain invisible to those who observe only isolated facts. But understanding is not the end of the road. It is merely the beginning. For any society that understands the world is changing eventually faces a new question. What place do we wish to occupy within this new reality? That question is not for governments alone to answer. It also belongs to societies, to regions, and in a sense to every citizen. No country can alter the course of history on its own, but it can decide how to prepare for it. It can strengthen its institutions. It can develop its capabilities. It can preserve the values it deems essential. And it can seek intelligent forms of cooperation with other nations that share legitimate interests and compatible goals. History offers numerous examples of this. Societies have rarely prospered in complete isolation, yet neither have they achieved stability when they abandon their identity to passively adapt to circumstances. Historical experience points to another path: cooperation, not cooperation based on dependency, but on the recognition of common interests, of shared responsibilities, and of goals capable of benefiting all involved. Each era has given these forms of cooperation different names: alliances, communities, blocs, unions, regional shields. The name changes. What truly matters is the purpose: preserving what a society values while building mechanisms for cooperation that allow it to face an increasingly complex and interdependent world. Perhaps therein lies one of the most significant conclusions of the analysis we have conducted today. When a historical process profoundly alters international reality, It also invites societies to reflect on how they wish to integrate into the new landscape, not out of fear, not through improvisation, but through understanding. We might call this a virtuous realignment, not as a universal formula, nor as a mandatory model, much less as an ideological proposal, but rather as a society's capacity to adapt to a changing reality without forsaking its fundamental principles. For adapting does not mean losing one's identity. It means finding a new way to preserve it. And perhaps that has always been one of the greatest lessons of Stoicism. Accepting that change is part of life, but understanding that the way we respond to that change is up to us. Perhaps the same holds true for nations. No country has complete control over the great movements of history, but it can decide how to prepare for it. It can strengthen its institutions. It can develop its capabilities. It can preserve the values it deems essential. And it can seek intelligent forms of cooperation with other nations that share legitimate interests and compatible goals. History offers numerous examples of this. Societies rarely prospered in complete isolation, yet neither did they achieve stability when they abandoned their identity to passively adapt to circumstances. Historical experience seems to point to another path. Cooperation, not cooperation based on dependency, but on the recognition of common interests, of shared responsibilities, and of goals capable of benefiting all their members. Each era has given these forms of cooperation different names: alliances, communities, blocs, unions, regional shields. The name changes. What truly matters is the purpose: preserving what a society values while building mechanisms for cooperation that allow it to face an increasingly complex and interdependent world. Perhaps therein lies one of the most important consequences of the analysis we have conducted today. When a historical process profoundly alters international reality, it also invites societies to reflect on how they wish to integrate into the new landscape, not out of fear, not through improvisation, but through understanding. Perhaps we might call this a virtuous realignment, not as a universal formula, nor as a mandatory model, much less as an ideological proposal, but rather as a society's capacity to adapt to a changing reality without forsaking its fundamental principles. For adapting does not mean losing one's identity. It means finding a new way to preserve it. And perhaps that has always been one of the greatest lessons of Stoicism. Accepting that change is part of life, but understanding that how we respond to that change is up to us. Perhaps the same holds true for nations. No country has complete control over the great movements of history, but all can decide how to prepare to face them with greater intelligence, greater serenity, and greater prudence. Perhaps that is the true utility of Stoic Geopolitics. It does not aim to predict the future. It aims to help us better understand the present. For only those who understand the present can responsibly prepare for the future. And perhaps that is the greatest challenge of our time. Not to accumulate more information, but to develop a greater capacity to interpret it. Because information changes every day, principles remain. And when principles correctly guide the way we observe reality, they also improve the quality of our decisions. We may never manage to completely eliminate uncertainty. It is part of the human condition. But we can learn to live with it without becoming prisoners of fear, haste, or prejudice. That is the invitation of Stoic Geopolitics. Observe before judging. Understand before reacting. Think before deciding. Because societies that learn to think more clearly also develop a greater capacity to build their own future. I am Carlos Alberto, the thinker, and always remember, to think well is to live better.